Girlfriend wants us, I am to live majority of our life in Kosovo, where she is from, rather than Boston, where I am from. TLDR, she wants us to raise family, spend majority of time in Kosovo. I'd prefer us to do so in Boston. Any thoughts on this are appreciated. A few important aspects of our relationship. I grew up in the Boston suburbs, she grew in Kosovo until she was 17. We met in undergrad at Cal, and have been dating for 6 years, 2 in school, 4 years after. We lived in Bay Area for 4 years, recently moved to Boston, my preference to be closer to my family although they are still 50 minutes away in suburb as we are in the city. She is homesick, has not been home much over last 6 years, is assimilating to life slowly in Boston. Our relationship is good but not great. We argue quite a bit about many little things. Our social life is very mediocre. At times we don't feel compatible, we can irritate each other a lot. I care greatly about her, but I'm not sure if we are soulmates. The topic of kids or future has come up recently, and we are stuck. My strong preference is for us to live in the US, have our kids go to school in US, and then we visit Kosovo as much as possible, perhaps 8 to 9 months in US, 3 to 4 months in Kosovo. Her preference is for us to live primarily in Kosovo, to be around her family for when we have kids, have them go to elementary school in Kosovo, and after maybe do middle school, high school in the US. The thought of moving to Eastern Europe, away from all friends and family into a country that does not speak English as its primary language, scares me quite a bit. Living in the Bay Area the last few years, I have grown further apart from all of my East Coast friends and family, everyone I am close with. As my parents, late 60s, get older, I want to be around for them. I'd prefer to live in suburbs by my parents and siblings and nieces, nephews and cousins. However, my girlfriend does not want to ever live in the Boston suburbs. If she's going to be in the US at all, she'd prefer to be in the city where there are more opportunities for her to meet people. She is very close with her parents, siblings, nephews and friends in Kosovo as well, and wants to be primarily around them. We are at a crossroads in determining how we are going to manage a family in the future. We both want to be near our families. For my entire life, I never assumed I would move to Europe, figuring I would stay in the East Coast and raise a family near my own. I prefer this. She didn't have a plan when she came to the US, but it's clear now she wants the majority of her life back in Kosovo, with visits to the US to see my friends and family. She also doesn't seem to particularly like the US or Boston very much at all. Is there any resolution at all to this? I'm thinking of seeking out a relationship counselor, but have no idea where to start. I guess I am starting here. Now for the top comments. About a year or two ago, myself from Serbia, and I had to go through almost the same exact conversations regarding the future. We met in the last year of undergrad about 7 years back. I can share my experience. It's unfortunate, but there were a few truths we had to deal with. I have absolutely no quality of life in Serbia, no matter what. I'll never know the language enough to be a local. There are no Serbian learning resources like there are for most other popular languages. I'll never have any kind of social life separate from hers in Serbia. I don't understand the cultural cues and mannerisms over there. My industry doesn't really exist in a significant way in Serbia. I never have shown any desire to live in Serbia. As for her, she chose to go to school in the US to try life here, and she's loved it. She learned English her whole life to be here, and speaks it perfectly. She has developed many friendships over the years, many of them independently of me. Her industry is far more developed here than in Serbia. As for the downside, her family is all in Serbia and won't ever move to the US. Same for her childhood friends. I often have many more connections in the cities where we live, since I've lived here my whole life. Though we don't live in the city I grew up in, I still often drive more of the social activity, just because of a lifetime of building connections. This means there's a bit of a social imbalance in our lives. We spend most of the holidays with my family. We had to have honest conversations about these things. There's no way I could ever be happy living in Serbia, and she knows that. She had to accept that she was choosing a life with me rather than the life she knew growing up. At the end of the day, it had to be her decision, because I would never try to convince her to give up her family and childhood country. That's too big of an ask. She chose me and our life here. We go to Serbia as often as we can. I've agreed to host her parents whenever they can come over, and we settled on a city that is neutral for both of us until we have kids. We are engaged and thrilled with the life we're building. I'm sorry, but if UGF is dead set on returning to Kosovo, it's hard to see a scenario where you both are happy. Moving to Kosovo is different than moving to Argentina, China, Germany, or Denmark, where the learning the language and culture are attainable, though not easily, within a couple years. The Balkan cultures are often very inaccessible, mostly because they have almost no immigration from non-refugees. They're still building up their industries, so professional job opportunities for young people are extremely scarce. Every time I've gone to Serbia and had somebody start talking to me at a bad, they get extremely excited that I'm American, and a crowd gathers around asking me questions they've literally never met an American. I can't take a lifetime of always being known as the American, instead of blending in as a regular dude. Your GF has to be able to see this and understand what she's asking of you. She chose to try life here, and you're part of life here. She needs to pick between life here with you, or life in Kosovo with her family and childhood friends. It's not fair for you to sway her one way or another, because a lifetime of resentment relies on it. She needs to be 100% confident in her response. Next comment. I am British, my husband is American, and if it weren't for him I probably wouldn't be living in the US either. I've been here for the same amount of time your girlfriend has and can totally understand feeling homesick and wanting to be near family. I got some news yesterday that my sister had some test results come back positive, and while I've been pushing away feelings of having missed out being near my family, that was an absolute gut punch last night. I originally moved to the US for work and moved from one English-speaking country to another. I thought it would be fine and that because I spoke the language it wouldn't be much different, but even so, it was an absolute culture shock. Have you ever been to Kosovo? Do you have any idea if it's a place you'll even like? It's hard for us to agree where to live, but it will be harder for you to make friends and find work in Kosovo not knowing the language. Do you have any idea what the visa process is like? Will you even be able to move there without getting married? Basically, me getting permanent residence in the US was long, stressful, and expensive. I wouldn't have done it for someone I felt lukewarm about. We've decided to move to the UK, and I hope that will happen in the next year. But my husband went through a bit of a rough patch last year. I sat down with him at one point and said he really needs to think about whether this relationship is what he wants. There's no point in going through all of the stress and expense of moving that could test the best of relationships, only to end up divorced. There is no such thing as soulmates. Nobody is perfect and everyone fights. But if you've felt like giving up at times and your relationship might buckle under the stress of moving to a whole new country, maybe it's not for you. You'll be in Kosovo initially without knowing anyone but your GF. She's the only person you'll have to rely on to get things done, and she'll be your entire social life at least initially. Unless you think you guys are good at compromising and working through stress, you're going to regret it. Someone is always going to lose moving away from family. It's a big sacrifice. Is it worth it for you? Next comment. What are your respective career and financial plans? How do you guys plan to make it in life and gain the financial stability required to support starting and growing a family? And how are the job opportunities for you and for her in Boston and in Pristina? Because you've described preferences and phobias about where you want to reside, how to raise your family, and what you want to do in general with your lives, she wants to socialize and meet people but haven't said anything at all about your careers, job opportunities, and how all of these plans will be funded. And I think the jobs, or job prospects, are going to be the determining factor. For example, if she has to move out of Pristina and live in some larger European city for a job, that would negate her live close to the parents' plans, and you'd end up somewhere in Europe where neither of you are close to your parents. You're also describing how the relationship seems to be mediocre, so it's also very likely that the two of you might split so you can follow your jobs and your preferences of living in the cities where your families are. Next comment. If you marry her, you will be marrying her culture, and your kids will be part of that culture. If that vibes with you, then power to you. But if it's important to raise your kids in American culture, then I would reconsider this whole decision. Do you even speak her language? Also, as someone who grew up as a third culture kid, moving kids around a lot is not great for them. It can be really rough socially and emotionally for kids to be torn away from friend groups, and go through wildly different school systems and miss social events like birthdays and camps. They're dragged somewhere else. Your kids may feel like they don't fit in either place, and other kids are mean to people who don't fit in. I think that's true everywhere. Your kids probably won't even feel American if they spend their formative years in Kosovo, maybe ever, even if they move later to the US. Not saying it's impossible, but I would think about it carefully. Stability is really important for kids. Lastly, if this relationship doesn't last 20 more years, how will you feel about having to travel to Kosovo to see your kids? How often could you realistically do so? Divorce is hard on kids anyway, even harder when you can't have them half the time and only see them once or twice a year. You sound less than enthusiastic about this relationship, so I would consider this future carefully. Next comment. Location and family become exponentially more important as a relationship progresses into family plus kids. It's important to understand the underlying values that are either pulling you closer or further apart. For example, do you both value family? Because if you do, that's great. Then maybe you could live in the US and eventually try to bring her parents over? Or, does she value the idea of Kosovo as her home, in which case, anywhere in the US will always be a compromise for her? Even if she agrees to stay, she will resent you for it. Do this type of accounting for the values that you both have. In my experience, the partners have typically decided on the logical place for them to live, usually near to economic opportunities, where cost of living safety are reasonable, and if possible near to one side of the family. Then from there, you do everything to cross the bridge to the other side as often as possible. I would say though, that cross-border relationships are now rapidly becoming very common. And that the problem you face has definitely been encountered and solved, so best of luck. Next comment. In regards to practicality, Kosovo is still very much in flux. It declared independence from Serbia in 2008, and some of the EU recognizes it as independent, but others, like Serbia and Russia, do not. Due to this and its previous poverty, the economy remains in great flux, and is quite unstable, creating a dependency on mostly imported goods, and a black market has risen. Poverty and unemployment are still large issues. These hurdles make a move for someone raised in the US very daunting and difficult, but not impossible. Definitely things to think about. In regards to emotion, you don't want to leave your family and she misses hers, understandable. Unless you two can come to a mutual agreement where you've both made some compromises, but are ultimately happy with the solution, neither will be happy in the long run. You both will grow to resent the other as the years move forward, and you both reflect on everything you've given up. Perhaps this is revealed now since you've moved to the Boston area, and she has no friends there and is feeling lonely. Perhaps it might take time to settle in, and you could suggest ways she meet people and create a social circle there? However, if that's not it, I don't believe this is relationship hurdle you can overcome. I'm sorry. Next comment. You can seek out a relationship counselor to work on your communication if you want. A quick Google search will provide you with names of therapists near you. You say you care for her greatly. Are you in love and want to spend the rest of your life with this woman, or are you used to having her around, and there are loving feelings there? The two are very different from each other. You can look at what your life might be like if you do move to Kosovo. First, you say you don't want to do because of your family. That's a perfectly legitimate way to feel, as is the way she feels. As an American educated in the States, you'll probably have no issue finding a high-paying job, at least high for there, even if you don't speak Albanian. American education and citizens are highly valued there. The education isn't the best. You may be able to afford sending your kids to a private school, and that could help. People aren't as open-minded there as here. Boston may be rough around the edges, but most people don't give what you're up to. If you're well off financially, you can live a pretty comfortable life there, and have access to similar things as you would here. The whole splitting your time between the countries will most likely not work, especially if your kids go to a traditional school. During break they'll want to be with the family in the country they're living in, and spend time with friends. It's just going to get harder the older they grow. It will also be difficult when you throw jobs into the mix. I do think a counselor is a good idea. Try to see if your girlfriend wants to move back BC, she's homesick, or she truly doesn't see herself living here. Also try to be more social. I know that's difficult right now, but stay in the city. Go out and do couple activities. You too can always visit Kosovo for holidays and breaks. Her parents can come and stay with you guys for a month or two. Personally, having been born and raised in a country that's almost exactly like Kosovo, I would never go back there to live. America is a dumpster fire, but it sucks a whole lot less.